40% Merlot, 40%
Oh,
Pascaline.
it's good for you.
Welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, the world in your glass.
Hi, I'm Michael Schachner, Wine Enthusiast Magazine's contributing editor for Spain and South America. In this episode, I'll join beverage directors Jeff Porter and Pascaline Lepeltier in decoding esoteric wine terms and descriptors, and we'll sound off on whether they're helpful or bound for the trash can.
Hello, my name's Jeff Porter. I'm the Beverage Operations Director for the Batali and Bastianich Hospitality Group.
Pascaline Lepeltier, Beverage Director and Partner, Rouge Tomate Chelsea.
We're here today at Lupa, one of the fine trattorias in New York City, and we're going to discuss wine terms. Wine terms, are they bullshit or are they legit? As we all know, describing wine requires a boatload of adjectives, and it's a deep mining or sensory memories. But it isn't science. It's subjective, and it's a craft, and it's definitely prone to hyperbole and a lot of fluffy verbiage. And that's where you guys are going to come in, and we're going to discuss some of these things. What I want to do is just kind of go through some common terminology that might be on the fence between BS and real. And then experts such as us are going to give it the or the yeah. So that's kind of where we're at on this. So let's, we'll get going, and we can kind of bounce around a little bit, but there's a term that I've used on many, many occasions to describe the mouthfeel in a wine. And, I've had some people say, I get that. Others say, I don't know what the hell that means, Mike. How about clacky? Does that word mean anything to you?
What does that mean?
For me, it's the equivalent of like high heels on a cement or tile floor.
Clack, 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 clack.
Clack, clack. It's like hard. Yeah. And I would say a wine might be something along the lines of a really, really thin, like Village Bourgogne that's a lot more acid than body, a lot more rip than softness. It just kind of suggests that it's hard, sort of like heels on a cement or tile floor.
So make you feel about acid, for example? Acid will be the kind of driven for this type of wine, like licking a bit of flesh and just making like tinge, tinge, tinge. Is what you're
just something where there isn't a lot of support or sponge or give or body to the wine, where it feels like it's very superficial and very hard.
I mean, I think my term for that would be disjointed, because it sounds like the wine's parts aren't all in play and there's just one voice is singing. Without the harmony amongst everything else. And right there, I used a bunch of non-wine terms to describe wine, which some people don't like either. But clacky is not in my vocabulary, but is now in my memory. And
yeah, maybe as a woman, I will try to use something else to, like the stiletto Louboutin on the cements. Just is not necessarily the main thing. But I think, I like the idea of onomatopoeia, like sound, to describe a wine, especially for non-professional, because sometimes it scares them. And at least when you use a clack, 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 right away they have not only a sound, but they have a visual idea. And I think sometimes it's super useful to go that path.
So at this point, it might be something that's a little bit esoteric, but possibly has the ability to properly describe at least an element of a wine.
Well, I think like vroom or buzz or yeah, exactly. The wine's like, it's like a laser. It's like bing, or like
that works pretty well.
Well, clacky is definitely one that refers more or less to mouthfeel and sensation. But let's move on to one that I think anyone who's ever tasted, smelled Sauvignon Blanc or has read about them knows, and that is cat pee. Where do we stand on cat pee?
It's not totally wrong. That very specific sensation about Sauvignon Blanc, sometimes you have to use words like specific trees, species, or other vocabularies that are very, very scary. And at the end, the cat pee one, I kind of help demystify wine a little bit. It's not the nicest one, that's for sure, but there is, if you put it in the right context and balanced by a real respect for the wine, a certain knowledge or the type of grape, I think helps people to suddenly feel a bit more comfortable when you are talking to them about wine.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is about using common terminology, and Pascaline's a master sommelier. I've sat for the MS before, and we have specific words or styles of phrasing for wine that we use that's kind of within the lexicon of the court. But that's very difficult and maybe not appropriate on the floor of a restaurant or retail shop all the time.
What about natural wine? Do you think you could succinctly, maybe in 100 words or less, not counting, tell anyone who cares what the hell is a natural wine and what it isn't?
Pascaline, I'm going to defer to you on this one.
Madame Naturelle?
Natural wine. There is that very simple sentence I like from Alice Faring, which is nothing added and nothing taken away. That's it. So farming made without synthetic chemicals, and then nothing added and nothing taken away during the vinification process. I think is the easiest definition is just grape juice that has been fermented. I think it's the easiest definition for me.
That's kind of the definition I use as well. Because once you open it to something else, it's a rabbit hole, and there's excuses for a lot of things. And then it should be simple. Literally wine made simple.
Yeah, one thing I have to say just on that, and it's very good, is the idea of craft and art. And to make a good natural wine, I think they are the toughest wine to make, because you just don't allow yourself to use anything to help you out to make something. So it requires an extraordinary amount of observation, a really big craft in terms of your farming, and a craft in terms of your winemaking. So there is a lot of wines that are not good, and the great natural wine are probably the toughest to achieve, because there is so much that you can't control and you don't allow yourself to control.
And natural wine, by no means, in your opinion, is an excuse for making bad wine.
No, there is absolutely a shit ton of bad natural wine. The same way there's a shit ton of bad conventional wine. I think the debate should be over today. There is good wine and bad wine. And then depending on what you are looking for in your wine, if you agree to accept a little bit of variation from a bottle to another or not, you maybe go to something that is less interventionist. If you want safety and making sure your wine tastes all the time all the same, you go with the one with a bit more intervention that is just good wine and bad wine. What is more important is we all need good farming. And that, I think, is a point. We need to really care about the farming first.
Full-bodied wines, red wines, California Cabernet, the Malbecs of Argentina, maybe some of the Super Tuscans. You go into a steakhouse or someplace and you hear these guys, oh, man, look at the legs on that. Look at the tears on that. I'm curious. I mean, tears and legs. Are these terms that you just stop crying and take a walk, or do they actually mean something? Tears and legs, do they help quantify or qualify a wine in any way as far as you're concerned?
When my guest asks me that, I just say it's not a qualitative measure. The legs aren't telling you if it's good or not. They may tell you how much alcohol or how much sugar it's in it, but at the end of the day, it's not. I don't use it as a valid importance in judging a wine. Unless I'm doing a blind tasting and Pascaline's judging me. So.
Yeah. No. It's just it's important if you may want to guess blind, but otherwise there is. I'm totally agree with you on that one. There is no judgment of quality on that one. It's just how the one should taste. There is so many parameters, so much more complex than people think too. After that, tears or legs are the right words. It's like that is another. It's a very other feminist point of view to have on this one. But no, it's more for the fun. If the guys have fun with that, you know what? It's great. Like it's enjoyable for them, no problem.
But at the end of the day, not a lot of value in that.
When I first started wine, the very first wine book I had when I was on the floor of the retail store was that little wine dictionary. So if a guest would ask me about something I didn't know, like let's say Tannat, I would look it up in the wine dictionary and it would describe the grape to me, even though I'd never had it. And then I would look for those key points, and that's how I've always used publications. Is like I've never thought of that word with that wine before, and like, do I understand that? Do I experience that? Like gooseberry. Gooseberry is used with New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, just like cat pee is all the time.
How many gooseberries have you ever eaten?
I've had 3.
That's 3 more than me, maybe.
Yeah, I had more.
And I sought out a gooseberry when I was at a grocery store one time because there was a sign that said gooseberries. I was like, I went over there and I ate one.
Sour.
And I was like, oh, I get it. Or passion fruit. I'm from Texas. We don't have those kind of... Well, growing up, I didn't have those. And when I had passion fruit, I was like, okay, I get this.
Passion fruit is one of the most distinct aromas and flavors that you can find in a wine. I think it's one of the most transferable fruit terminologies that exist.
But if you've never had it, it's extremely difficult. And I think that sommeliers fall into that trap a lot of using our own internal lexicon to be like, oh, passion fruit. And then they're like, I don't know what that is. And you're like, okay, and you have to kind of shift on the fly. But again, I think that goes back to, for me, the guest drives the conversation because at the end, it's their ultimate happiness that I'm trying to provide.
Let me ask you guys, it seems to me that a lot of sommeliers, wine writers, we've obviously pumped a lot of our own gas, and we know what that smells like because I am constantly seeing petroleum used as a descriptor predominantly for aromatics and predominantly in what grape? Riesling. So where do we stand on petroleum, gas, diesel?
But once again, we need to make the guest understand very quickly. The guest is never here when we're on the floor. It doesn't matter if we want to give a lecture about why the Riesling tastes like that and what's the reason, and we can start to talk about terpenes and all that stuff. But so if it evokes something to the guest, it's not the sexiest word, but sometimes you just need to make the guest feel comfortable understanding what's going to happen. But that word, I have to say, just rings a bell for me in terms of our job, and maybe you are not going to agree with me on that, but the more I work, the more I realize that our guests, they never talk really about aromatics when they want to pick us a wine. So we are talking about terminology right now. In fact, what you are asking us is how are we going to describe the wine to our guest? But the very first stage usually is a guest arrive and he's telling us, okay, tonight, I'm going to have that and that and that, I think, on the menu. And you know what? I don't like red wine. I like white. And so here we are. I'm like, okay, you like white wine? Fantastic. Which type of white do you like usually? Do you like dry? Do you like sweet? Do you like with a bit of oak? And suddenly you realize that the way we work is not really describing aromatics that are secondary. The very first thing we need to understand is the structure of the wine that the guest is going to look for. And that doesn't require all this fancy aromatics terminology where we can go for forever and ever and ever and ever on. And that the petroleum thing comes at the end. For me, I need to know first if they're going to maybe like Riesling, so I need to know if they're going to like high acid or not, if they're going to like bone dry or off dry, if they're going to like something with little to no oak, and that is what I need to focus on first and foremost. And then the aromatics are going to be secondary, and then you have the whole subjective stuff happening.
That's 100% how I approach the table, and I think the majority of our sommeliers approach the table that's building the dialogue, and the words are like big. They're simple words, light, big,
sweet,
fresh, sweet,
rich.
But petrol and petroleum don't fall into any of those. Has anybody ever said,
a lot of
my God,
times
this smells like gas?
Yes, but after when we pour the wine or when we talk about the
That's
wine.
what I was going to say. The guest usually will tell me, is like, oh, there's a petrol note, and because we'll play off that a little. A lot of times the descriptors come after they have the wine and they've sat with it.
Have either of you guys ever tasted a river rock? I mean, have you ever come across a river rock in Chablis or Chenin Blanc or maybe a Verdicchio from the Marche, Muscadet? Ever?
I've used river rock often, and I grew up fishing, and I love, there's a specific smell that rocks with water going over them have, and I've used that a ton in describing wines, and I think Verdicchio is great. Muscadet 100%, but that also invokes a very fond memory in myself when I hear those words and those smells, and I think that's again captures why I like wine so much.
It's a lot of evocation. You know, you think about a river, you think something like a little bit wet, but you see the river. I think most of the people are going to see a beautiful, idyllic little river going through, and you can hear the cascade, you can hear the noise. So on our side, we need to know why there is that smell is here. We need to understand why there is maybe a slight reduction happening in this type of wine, maybe enhanced by a bit of CO2 and all that kind of thing. So even if saying river rock, we need to understand it for guests like savory wine more than fruit-forward wine. That will be a big one. And then what do we do? Is that occur because sometimes it's so extreme that our guests may be a little bit offended by that. But it's we need to make our guests dream in a certain way, you know? We need to make our guests very, very happy. And we need to evoke a lot of things that are just not absolutely technical. Because if I start to talk about, it's going to be slightly reduced on my non-aromatic grape with a little bit of skin contact and some CO2, they're going to look at me and say, I'm going to get 2 beers.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we do is, I always tell my sommeliers, and what I like to do when guests come to the restaurant is we try to give them a staycation. And through, if we're talking about Chianti Classico or talking about Barolo, I'm trying to evoke those feelings, those places, because that's always what's made food and wine feel better for me. And you know, and at the end of the day, it comes down to the table. Because if there's 4 business people having a very intense meeting, it's a in and out, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. Here's the wine, and they usually order it themselves.
Some adjectives to throw at you guys. You guys can guess what I'm trying to talk about here. Rubbery, scratchy, round, supple, sweet. What do you think I'm describing? What do you think I'm talking about?
At the same time? All of them at the same time?
Yeah, these are sort of adjectives for a certain noun here.
Texture?
How do we... Texture begins with a T. Tannins.
Tannin.
All right.
Tannins. Scratchy, rubbery. I mean, can you have sweet tannins, or are we veering off into BS land? Do tannins have flavor?
Savor, not flavor. Savor, like it's a feeling on your tongue. Like you can
Sensation.
It's sensation. What you can feel in your tongue is salt, sweetness, tannin, gas, and a little bit of the bitterness. You know, it's like what everybody can share, I would say. So they are side by side. They can be.
So tannins can be pretty well perceived, in your opinion.
They should. They should. They're part of the very. Is when I was
fabric of the wine.
They're the fabric of the wine. And go back to the structure. The structure is our only common language. Structure is a common language. If something is tannic for me, there is 99.9% of chance that is tannic for you. Sweet for me, sweet for you. Acid for me, acid for you. Salty for me, salty for you. Because it's just the amount of cells we have on palate are going to be very, very similar. Unless you have a disease, a very specific disease that doesn't allow you to feel that. But otherwise, we are on the same board, all of us. Flavors and aromas are where the subjectivity comes into the game. But otherwise, we are talking similar language. So it's why when I say light tannin, you're going to feel light tannin. I say full-body tannin, you're going to feel the same.
We're upfront with a guess. I don't say like, I would say that the tannins are bold. Like your mouth will. I always use the thing, if you go to the dentist office and someone fills your mouth with cotton balls, that's what a high tannin wine feels like to me. And some people like the masochistic nature of that, and some people don't. So we talk about that feeling, because tannin to me is all about how it feels on my palate. And then we go from there, because there's a wine for everybody somewhere.
But just on the tannin, just to because very few people get that name, especially if they don't drink wine. I always like to compare with tea, or using something else that another field where people understand and say, this is going to be pretty tannic. Just think when you like your tea bag 30 seconds or a minute too late and like too much on your teacup, and suddenly it's like this that, and it's like, okay, I get it. No, you know what? I don't really like that feeling. I want something a little bit smoother.
Sounds like a key with wine terminology is sometimes drawing it back to more common terminology, everyday terminology, or taking it away from wine and applying it to another beverage, tea or something along those lines can be very helpful.
just because I'm not an English speaker, so I don't have all the vocabularies that sometimes I should have, but it's very easy for me to do a comparison with tea or coffee, or when I have to explain bitterness, I say, think about an IPA for this kind of like Cabernet Franc, and suddenly people are like, okay, I get it. And it's very helpful for me, in fact, more than technical words.
As a somewhat native speaker of English, I do the exact same
You're
thing.
from Texas, right?
I am from Texas, so Texan is a little different. We use really small words, but I think when you have to find, it's about finding common ground with a guest, and tea, coffee, soda, beer, things that are very common make it so much easier to connect on a different level with your guests to provide. And again, our job is to provide them what they want. And that's important, because it's not about getting that one, what do we call it, going for the jugular. That has never been a good sales technique, because everyone never likes feeling like they got screwed.
Choked.
Yeah, or soaked. Exactly.
Let me just ask you both, just off the top of your heads, is there just one term that just strikes you that, I've seen this term, I've heard this term multiple times, and to me it's just pure BS. I am not buying this. This does not work for me. Anyone?
Like what we just said, I don't think any word is crap. I think a word helps you to understand a wine. As a descriptor is something different as a judgmental descriptor. That's the only thing. Like if you need to use any word to make yourself understand, and absolutely no premises to describe. If it's to put a judgment and to use a dismissive word, there is something totally different, and that is where we are at. I think description is no problem. I will go in a bigger, just one. There's not one word.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a good conversation, because I think we're realizing that there really isn't anything that's necessarily outright out, no good, total crap. For somebody, it could mean something, and that I think that's what we're getting at, that they're really, with further explanation, if the time is right to further explain, almost everything can be further explained and can be given some legitimacy.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's our part to understand the phenomenon. And once again, we are not enologists and we are not winemakers, so the chemical behind the whole these aromatics or flavors or savors, we try to know about them, but we are not scientists behind them. Our job is just to know that when we are going to open that bottle of wine we haven't tasted for a year and a half, we tasted in barrels, that wine should taste like that and should feel like that, and we should be able to transmit that to a customer. And then if we need to explain all the technical stuff, we are going to try our best, and then the guest wants to know even more about that, we are going to put them in touch with the right person to know more about that. But I'm not sure a molecule term is going to ever sell a bottle of wine.
I don't think it is. But I think what I've learned here, speaking with you today, this afternoon, is that I'm envious of your ability to verbally explain wine and to communicate with your customers, where I'm restricted to the written word. And that, I think, is where a lot of these sort of ridiculous or quasi-nebulous wine terms come out. It's a constant quest for variety, to try to describe things multiple times over and over again without just repeating yourself. Not everything can be fresh, fruity, intense, strong. We're victims of our own jobs and the quantity of wines that we deal with.
When I write like tasting notes for my staff on a wine, like you don't want to. We replace this Nebbiolo with this Nebbiolo. Like cherry is a prominent, flavor profile in Nebbiolo. So I tend to say like red fruit. So when you're doing Rioja, let's say you're doing a whole review of a bunch of Rioja, 20 Rioja,
which I do. Yeah.
How do you do that? What like do you try to force, or do you use a thesaurus, or like do you repeat some of the words? I mean, it feels like you'd have to.
Well, there's certainly going to be, for instance, with Rioja, let's say we're talking about Rioja Reserva, Gran Reserva, we're certainly going to come across some commonalities. Vanilla is going to be a tobacco. Oak elements are all going to be elements that I'm not fearful of repeating, but I don't want to describe every wine similarly. I'm trying to see if a wine triggers some sort of sensory memory, be it a flavor memory, an aromatic memory, a place memory, and try to draw back to that. But to force myself to simply just use different terminology, I don't do that as a rule, but I'm sure that subconsciously that's happening. Nobody wants to repeat themselves.
Yeah, I think what we have the luck to do, be on the floor, and you being in writing, you have to use concept, and you have a very little amount of time. You have that space on a paper. We are with time. We can take the time, and we can really adequately spend that duration with the guest, because it's all our problem, and we have the same problem, is we are describing quality into quantity, whatever concept or number, and it just never work, So the only feel sometimes I have, and I don't know for you, is almost the unwritten communication with my guests. And I think sometimes it's even more powerful than the word I'm going to use. And that unwritten communication, even when I smile and I say, you know what, I'm going to try the wine right now, try the wine in half an hour, we take the time. And you can't do that on a piece of paper. We're writing that. And we are working with wine, and wine is for me, is time encapsulated in a bottle. So how do we handle that? It's our challenge, no?
Yeah, very different. They're very different animals, very different elements of communication. I might write 30 notes over a 5-6 hour span after tasting 30 wines. That's not something that you would have to do, but you might have to explain wine verbally to 30 different customers on a different evening. So it's and you wouldn't necessarily want to just revert back to the same things that you've said before. We may reach more people in quantity, right, but we have no direct interaction, and we don't know what the response is to what we write, at least directly. Occasionally we'll get some kind of feedback, but that's rare, whereas you get feedback all the time.
Right.
And it's where I can see we have way more freedom with our vocabulary. We have the freedom because we will talk to the person,
to our people who are around us,
to our guests. So it can be slang, it can be very elevated, it can be very technical, it can be I don't speak English, you don't speak English, let's talk with our hands and try to say, you like it, awesome, like you just with your hands.
Also, you don't have to be as unbiased as we do, as I do. You're free to interject more opinion into what you are.
We're inherently biased by making a list.
And then there is Instagram and Yelp. So if they're they can make a critic online.
Exactly. I mean, I think I know for me, having left retail and getting into restaurants was more of a selfish thing than anything else, because I love the instant gratification of seeing someone happy. It's fun. It's a rush. And again, I think Pascaline said it really well. We get to use our body. So guests can see when you're super into something, and so it's the smile, it's the non-verbal cues, and how do you use your body when you're describing this wine that you've just done 150 times over 2 days, and trying to use these words that connect to people.
I think when I first got into wine, terminology wasn't as much an issue as just factual basis. Did I have the factual knowledge to understand what was being spoken about? The adjectives, again, some meant things, some didn't. They didn't really bother me as much as knowing the factual basis behind wine, where they come from, what the cepages were, what some of the history were behind the chateaus, ownership. That type of thing was what was intimidating more so than terminology. Terminology I could slough off and figure it out over time, or they were just basic adjectives. They made sense.
I think for me, I started selling wine legally when I was 21 in Austin, Texas, and my biggest challenge was pronouncing all the wines correctly. I'm from BFE, Texas, and saying Corton Charlemagne or whatnot. That was really scary to me, because
that's what Pascaline still says.
Oh, is that the correct pronunciation? Oh my God, why'd they correct me? But I think, having a customer come up to you and be like, I'd like that Merlot, and then making the choice not to say Merlot and correcting them and being like, oh, we're going to go with Merlot today, because you don't want to make people feel bad. And I was intimidated when I got into wine circles and people were describing wines, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But I picked up adjectives and then became comfortable in myself to be able to be like, listen, this is my own experience, and I'm going to describe it how my life allows me to describe it. And I think, again, that's the beauty of wine, is it is a personal thing. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a bit different for me because I learned wine first, the terminology in French, and I am a literature major, so I always like words, and I did Greek and all that kind of thing, so I always love words. And so the terminology, I was never scared about the terminology per se. I was on the other side, exciting, like, wow, what these words mean? Like, I'm going to learn something new. And I did philosophy too. I'm like, wow, was this a new concept for me? So what does that concept relate to into the reality of the wine world, and how can I handle that? And then I just realized it was, but also once again, because I went from philosophy to wine, I realized the importance of not looking like too obnoxious by using extraordinary specific words. So the terminology is always, for me, you communicate, you try to say something to someone, and your job, my job, is to adapt and to have enough vocabulary understanding to be able to talk to a producer, and to be able to talk to a buyer, to be able to talk to a wine critics, to be able to talk to a guest, and to have the whole common vocabulary to be able to connect all these words, and to know that if you say that word on your circle, that means that word on that circle. And I find that as an excitement, because and once again, it's because I study literature, but I'm very sad to see that we are using over and over the same words. Mm-hmm. And I think our vocabulary, I see it in French, and I don't know yet enough in English because it's still a brand new language for me, but it's getting poorer and poorer. I think we should be more and more, like, we should use and be more and more specific. We are losing words, and words are fantastic. Words are fantastic to be able to describe nuances. And so I would encourage people to learn more words and to learn more concepts, just because you are going to be able to express yourself in a more nuanced way. And so I'm very sad when I see words disappearing, in fact, not being used.
Well, we'll come back with as many words as we possibly can.
Bring me words.
More words. Plus de mots. More words.
More words.
Pascaline, Jeff, this is a lot of fun. Great information, great opinions. Excellent. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's do some shots.
This podcast is produced by Large Media, L-A-R-J Media. Wine Enthusiast is made possible by grapes, sunshine, and wine, and by the hard-working editors who bring you news and information on your favorite beverage every day. If you like what we're doing, share our podcast with your friends and give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. For more fun wine information, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Wine Enthusiast.